I found a store that sells the shoes of dead people and bought 3 pairs. Souls, read the sign that hung above the small store. Walk in their shoes, written below it. The motto caught my eye on my way home from work, and the color-faded sneakers on my feet were ogling it too. A little bell rang. As I opened the door, the inside smelling like leather. There were rows of shelves with dozens of pairs of shoes, all different kinds. An old man sitting behind the register perked his head up as he saw me. "Hello, how can I help you?" Just browsing." "All right, let me know if you need anything." I skimmed down the aisles as I scanned the shoes with my gaze. There were sneakers, boots, high heels, anything you could think of. Almost all of them seemed old or worn. The first pair I pulled off the shelves were loafers, something nice that I wear to work or fancy events. Its black leather was creased but intact, and the metal buckle still shined. As I continued down the aisles, the next pair of shoes I found were white Air Force Ones with only a moderate amount of stains. With enough scrubbing, I could make them look brand new, so I took them as well. And finally, I came across a scuffed pair of dark brown boots. They looked good for wintertime, so I tucked them between my arms along with the other 2 pairs. On a tight budget, I figured that was enough. I dumped the pairs onto the counter as the old man looked up. "Is this all?" I nodded. He typed on a cash register, his eyes darting to each pair as the keys clicked. I handed him crumpled bills as he put the shoes in brown boxes. "Have a nice day, and enjoy their shoes." Thank you." I furrowed my brows as I turned away, his wording confusing me. Their shoes. It was an odd thing to say, and it stuck to the back of my mind on the way home. As I stepped inside, I set the boxes down and unpacked them. It wasn't a traditional shoe store, so I had to hope they'd all fit right. I decided to unpack the loafers first, knowing I'd be wearing those the most. Sitting on my bed, I slipped the first one onto my foot. I wiggled my toes around as I felt the fit of the shoe. It fit perfectly, but with one of my feet being slightly bigger than the other, I decided to try the other one on just to make sure. As I slipped it on, I felt this drowsiness cloud over me. My eyelids sank as my vision blurred, nausea brewing in my stomach. Suddenly, the softness of my bed beneath me grew hard, the temperature around me dropping to a chill. As my vision cleared, I looked around and realized I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I was in a hospital room, the beeping of a heart rate monitor filling the silent room. I looked down at myself as I was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, but I still had on the black loafers. Then I realized there was a shaking hand wrapped around mine. A dying woman laid in the bed. She was old, losing hair, and visibly tired. I didn't recognize her, yet I felt like I knew exactly who she was. I felt like she raised me, and now she was dying right before my eyes. I wiped away a tear, as the preparation for grief became overwhelming. She smiled at me weakly, with fading eyes. "I can't do this without you. I can't be here with you," I sobbed. I spoke with no control, but I didn't feel like I was lacking control either. "Yes, you can. I've prepared you for it all of your life." I leaned in as she kissed my forehead softly, gently wiping away a tear. "Take good care of Gigi for me, would you?" I nodded with a smile as tears continued to stream. Somehow that name was familiar too, more than familiar. That was my sister, her face popping into my head. Another person I didn't recognize yet did at the same time. In the moment, it felt impossible to question what was going on, as if it was normal. As I sat back down, I watched life disappear from her. As her heart rate flattened, I collapsed into tears, the drops soaking into my pants. The pain was something I had never felt before. It was consuming. Everything felt like it was over, like it was crashing down. Suddenly, I turned to a cracked window that let in a cold, gentle breeze. My face continued to crumble as I rushed towards it. Prying it open, the wind began brushing my hair back as I lifted my foot onto the windowsill. As I balanced on it, I held onto the edges of the window as I looked down. Vertigo hit me like a train as nausea brewed in my stomach. The distance from the window to the ground was terrifying, but enough. I turned to my mother one last time, her corpse lying peacefully on the bed. "I'm sorry." I propelled myself from the windowsill and out into the open air. I squeezed my eyes tight as I free fell, the powerful wind deafening as I pressed against me. As I continued to fall, awaiting the end, I opened my eyes, and as I did, watching the pavement below me quickly grow closer, all I could think about was how much I didn't want to die. But it was too late, as I was now closer to the ground than I was to the safety of the windowsill beneath my feet. I clenched my eyes again as I reached the ground, experiencing a near split second of a gnarly, crunching sound in my ears as everything blinked to blackness. Suddenly, I found myself in my bedroom again, my feet safely on the wooden floorboards. My body trembled as my eyes darted around. I tried to tell myself I had just fallen asleep, but it was all too real. I felt all of it. After quickly kicking the shoes off, I stuffed them back in the box and crammed them in my closet. But as terrifying as it was, something about it intrigued me deeply. To be able to literally walk in the shoes of somebody else, it's something you can never truly comprehend, especially someone else's final moments. So I decided that, after taking a break from the first experience, I would try the next pair of shoes tomorrow and see if they would have the same effect. I struggled to fall asleep that night, thinking about the body that I inhabited. To think that he would have done anything to have gone back but couldn't. It unsettled me, to say the least. The next morning, I decided that I wouldn't be taking my worn-down running shoes on my morning run. Instead, I pulled out the box that contained the sneakers. Dropping them by my feet, I took a deep breath before slipping my first foot inside. Then I prepared for the heaviness to drape onto me as I put on the second shoe. But to my surprise, nothing happened. I sat and waited for a moment, the untied shoes on my feet, and it still didn't happen. I thought maybe I had just struck lucky with one pair that happened to be owned by a dead person. I trotted down my apartment steps and stepped outside. The sun beamed down on me as I queued up a song on my phone and slipped in my earbuds. Then, as I planted my feet onto the ground and began to run, the haze clouded me. Just like last time, my vision blurred, but I could still feel my legs moving, one foot in front of the other. As my music drowned out into white noise and eventually silence, I felt my ever-moving feet plant onto the floor again. My lungs and heart blazed with exhaustion as I found myself flying down what appeared to be a school hallway. I didn't know why I was running, but I knew that pure and utter fear coursed through my veins and fueled my legs. Then, as I ran, a smeared trail of blood paralleled to me. As I ran down it, my body trembled as it led to the body of a young girl lying in a pool of blood. Bullet holes riddled her body and her backpack. Then that's when the deafening sound of rapid gunfire went off, and I remembered why I was running. I managed to run even faster as blood-curdling screams echoed throughout the empty halls. Backpacks and binders dumped across the floors. I needed somewhere to hide, so I began pounding on the first door next to me. I tugged on its locked handle as I pleaded for help. "I'm a student, I swear! Please let me in, I don't want to die." The door quickly cracked open as someone yanked me inside a dark room. A teacher closed the door behind us and locked it again, prompting me to sit in the corner with everyone else as she shushed us. I dropped to the floor and squeezed in with everyone. The silent room filled with the sounds of restrained sobs and shaking breaths. Fellow students next to me had their phones out, their trembling fingers quickly typing out their goodbyes. Knowing there was a chance this was it, I pulled out my phone and quickly began texting my parents. "Shooting at school, I love you." Unable to handle their responses, I slid my phone back into my pocket as I prayed. Then all of our bodies winced as the sound of muffled gunfire boomed from outside. Students clamped their mouths shut as they bottled up screams in their throats. Suddenly, the room erupted in terror as bullets began to tear through the wooden door. Everyone in the room scattered as those who couldn't move fast enough slumped against the blood-splattered wall. Cramped in another corner, everyone quietly sobbed as light from the hallway poured through the bullet holes. Then the crowd screamed, as the shooter began kicking in the door. With each pound, our bodies jolted. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I told myself I couldn't handle what my parents would say, but if I was going to die, I needed to know. So I quickly pulled my phone out and shakily opened the message. "Are you okay? I love you so much, baby." Then, as I looked up, the shooter had the door down and was in the room. With a burst of fire, he had the teacher down in seconds. The students cried in horror as he then turned to us with his gun raised. My ears rang as he sprayed us with bullets, blood splashing around. The shock was so numbing, but I knew I was shot. Within seconds, everything went to black, and I found my feet back on the pavement of my street. I gagged as puke flooded up my throat, then puked onto the sidewalk. My heart was still pounding. It was all too real. Too shaken up to continue, I ran back home and ripped the shoes off my feet. After that, I had no desire to try on the final pair that I bought. Curiosity had killed the cat. I couldn't do it again, so I shoved the shoes into the back of my closet and never touched them again. As months passed, I nearly forgot I had even owned them. Out of sight, out of mind. During this time, I had moved out of my apartment and into a house with my girlfriend at the time. Packing was chaotic, and it wasn't all done by me, so somehow the shoeboxes got caught up in all of the mess. With a lot of time spent at work, my girlfriend would do a lot of the unpacking while I was gone. Keep in mind, I had never mentioned the shoes to her. I felt like she'd look at me like I was insane, and I wouldn't blame her for thinking so. The experience itself was insane. So to her, she was just putting her boyfriend's shoes in his closet. One day, on a winter morning, I had overslept for work. Rushing to get ready, I snatched a pair of boots that I didn't have time to give a double take. I crammed my feet into them. As I flew out the door, my grip tight on my car keys. As I muttered curses to myself under my breath, I got in the car, and as I closed the car door, it began to happen again. The sounds of the busy street distanced to silence as my vision blurred. As it cleared up, I found myself in the driver's seat of a car. When I looked around, I found myself in dark woods, parked on a trail. Then I heard the muffled sound of screaming as someone wriggled around in the trunk. Unlike my feelings the other two times, this one was different. Upon hearing the screams, they went in one ear and out the other. I didn't feel anything. I stepped out of the car, the humid air heavy against my skin. Closing the door with a gloved hand, I slowly walked towards the trunk of the car as dirt crunched under my boots. Opening the trunk revealed a petrified woman whose arms and legs were bound by rope. She desperately wiggled around as she screamed into a strip of cloth that wrapped around her mouth. "No! No!" She attempted to cry as I gripped her by the hair and ripped her from out the trunk. She crashed to the ground, tears streaming down her face. Bunching her hair up in my grip, she continued to attempt her escape as I dragged her down a dirt path. She groaned as I dropped her head to the ground, standing in front of a human-sized hole that I had dug. Suddenly, she had maneuvered the cloth off of her mouth and began screeching, "Help! Help!" "No point in that, darling." "No, stop, please!" She desperately begged as I kicked her onto her back and crouched above her, her cries echoing throughout the vast forest. I remained unfazed as she tried to knee my back. "Shut your fucking mouth!" Her teary eyes widened as I wrapped my hands around her throat, the leather of my gloves stretching. Her wriggling grew vigorous as I tightened my grip, breaths desperately trying to make their way into her lungs. I clenched my teeth as I made my grip even tighter, her face turning red as she failed to fight back. She refused to look at me, her eyes darting around the midnight sky. I pursed my lips, watching as life slowly faded from her eyes. I shook her neck in my grip as her attempted breaths wheezed to a stop, her widened eyes emptying. Suddenly, I whipped my head around as the sound of a snapping twig caught my ear. In the dark stood a silhouette, one that I didn't have time to make out, as a loud bang rang out. My eyes shot open as I felt my mouth filling up with blood. My grip around her throat quickly loosened as I collapsed next to her. Blood spurted from the hole in my throat as I coughed up what pooled in my mouth. I stared up at the star-filled sky as a police officer ran over, his gun still raised. He dropped next to her and checked her pulse, then spoke over his radio. Quickly bleeding out, everything soon faded to black. I then found myself back in my car, my grip tight on the steering wheel. I quickly pulled my trembling hands away as a tear streamed down my cheek. I hesitantly looked down at the boots on my feet, realizing what I was wearing. Instead of going to work, I ran back inside and grabbed the other 2 pairs. Flying down the streets, I halted to a stop in front of the shoe store and carried the boxes inside. "Making a return?" the old man said as he heard the bell on the door. Yeah. The usual. I placed the boxes onto the counter, my body still trembling. He tallied up the prices as he looked at each pair. "So, how was it?" "What? What was it like, walking in their shoes?" Unpleasant. Well, imagine how they felt." "Actually, you already did. Have a nice day." He smiled ominously as he handed me crumpled up bills. With a hesitant hand, I quickly snatched the cash and flew out the door. Getting back in my car, I let out a deep, exhausted sigh. The next day, on my way to work, I passed the store again. Except it was vacant. A streaky outline of the logo was left on its bricks, the space appearing entirely empty through its dusty windows. I furrowed my brows as I slowly drove by, trying to see if a note was left about a relocation or a retirement. But there was nothing. It was just gone. I never found out who that man was or where he went. I never found out how he got all those shoes. I don't think I had ever even seen somebody else in the store. I had pondered on the idea that maybe it appeared just for me. It sounded crazy, but so did seeing visions of dead people. I couldn't figure out if I was supposed to be taught a lesson, but I knew it was one I could have lived without learning. Take a walk with me. I want to chat with you. I want to tell you how I got away with murder. Do you love your family? Do you really? Think about it. Take a moment and walk with me. Family is forever. Family is a group of people that are supposed to love, guide, and protect you, so people have said. Family is bound to you for eternity by blood. With how many people that had to come together to make you, just you. You're drowning in blood, sweetie. And so am I. My family was on a different level of fucked up. My father was a car salesman who got high off of crack cocaine and screwed his coworker. Smiling in the faces of his neighbors who whisper about his sexuality behind his back while he's thinking he has everyone fooled. Idiot. My mother wasn't innocent. In fact, she was worse than my dad. To everyone else, she was the unassuming second-grade teacher who went to church every Sunday and attended a book club with her friends. Fucking liar. She was horrible. A righteous bitch who would get friendly with her brother after her husband went to sleep. Beat me with her precious brown leather Bible in hand whenever I took too long doing the dishes. She would lock me in the basement for hours and hours. She once left me in there from the crack of dawn to the middle of the night, and when she let me out, she smiled in my face and told me, "I honestly forgot you were there." I begged for food, but she told me it was too late to cook, and she shouldn't have to waste food on me. Waste. My older brother got the better treatment from my family. My father and mother didn't beat him like they would beat me. They didn't starve him like they would starve me. He stayed in his room on his computer, shirtless sometimes while he talked smoothly to some man or woman on the other side of his camera. The money he got for his cam sessions got him weed, white rum, and a car that he didn't have the license for. Bought secondhand from a friend from somewhere in Chicago. Regardless of the law, he would take it out to practice. He didn't care for my curled up, screaming, and scared self, who he threw into the trunk of his car. He would drive around for hours and speed up when he saw a speed bump in the road, then laugh as he heard me cry in pain. That's how I broke my arm. This was all before I turned 7. Just so you have a better image of how messed up this story gets. Are you ready? It was a cool Tuesday afternoon. My backyard was covered in leaves, orange, yellow, red. I had just turned 15 and it was the middle of autumn. I was alone as I sat on the back porch steps. Not just alone on the steps, but there was no one else home. It was so peaceful, the kind of peace you wish would never go away. But good things never last long, do they? I could hear my mother's heels clicking up the sidewalk as she got to the house. Her loud laughter let me know that she was on the phone, and she only ever genuinely liked talking to one person on the phone. My uncle, with her keys jingling in the lock. It was such a smooth transition for me to close the back door and hop up to my room. My house had no pictures. The walls weren't ever decorated with anything, and it always smelled of something foul. No one in this house ever thought to make memories. Everyone was too busy trying to forget, but forget what? It's not like they've been suffering. I've been the lightning rod for them for as long as I've been breathing. But there is no pity for me, just abuse. Passing my brother's room, it now had the permanent smell of weed and burnt rubber. I made sure to move quickly and quietly when I passed his room. His attention on me was never good, as I've learned over the years. How do you explain to someone that you've created tactics to move around your house just so you won't have to be noticed by your family? All for the sake of your own safety, your life. How do you explain that? You can't, or at least that's what you're taught when you're young. Your mother scolding you for tattling, telling you to keep your mouth shut. Whatever happens in the family stays in the family. Snitches get stitches, my brother would say. I hated my brother. I would always have to escape to my room whenever they came home. I would always have to hide, listening carefully at the door for anyone in the hall so I could run to the bathroom without being noticed. Watching which floorboard I stepped on at night, on my way to the kitchen, sleeping with my alarm clock under my pillow to get an earlier start so I could avoid everyone else. Taking showers at the break of dawn, where everyone was still too deep in sleep to be disturbed by the sound of spraying water. When they were home, there was no such thing as peace, but I will get to the point. That Tuesday night was the night that my worldview changed entirely. Humans are naturally wired for survival. You do what you must do to keep breathing, but you can only handle so much before you snap. My mother had decided to throw a party. It started from the middle of the afternoon and went on late into the night. My father, mother, and brother all sat in the living room with our neighbors and looking at them. You could almost trick yourself into believing they were perfectly normal. They laughed, smiling politely, and entertained their guests as everyone drank and ate gross goat cheese on saltine crackers. But of course, I knew better. My father wasn't fooling anyone with that long sleeve he was wearing. He was trying to hide the point of entry, all while looking sleep-deprived and waifish. The veins at the sides of his forehead were bulging with the need to run to the bathroom and just do one more line. To get through the evening and I'll quit. My mother's liver was giving out. She was once skinny with gentle curves, like a supermodel if she twisted her body in the mirror long enough to fool herself. Now she was as bloated as a whale. None of her clothes no longer fit, and she had to go out and buy a new wardrobe. My uncle sitting next to her, but he entertained her neighbor from next door instead, laughing flirtatiously and laying his hand on her knee. Our neighbor flirted back with him, tossing her hair over her shoulder and batting her lashes. Our neighbor was married to a Marine, and my brother, sitting with his friends, all drinking beer and talking as if they had anything to talk about. None of them had jobs. None of them had families to take care of. None of them had shit to do with their lives except mooch off their parents. They could only talk about memories from high school, which quickly got them bored. Then they were reduced to only sitting in silence while everyone else talked to them about their own lives. I sat in my room, avoiding them all. Those idiots, sadists, adulterers, and liars. Every one of them is the next person's paramour in one way or another. By the time the party had died, it was 12 o'clock. I knew it wouldn't be a good night, based on how hard my mother stomped up the steps. I saw from my window my uncle escaping to my neighbor's house, his hand on her ass as she giggled drunkenly. My mother has fell out of favor. Funny. She screamed my name and demanded that I come and clean up her mess, moving down the hall to my room. It was like a horror movie. her slow steps moving closer and closer to my door. My arms folded over the windowsill as I took in the cold night air. I can still remember the feel of the wind on my face. My door was thrown open by my mother, her long hair hanging in front of her face as she desperately onto her wine glass. She stumbled and swayed in the doorway. Her eyes couldn't even find me. She yelled for me to come down and clean up her mess again, my brother yelling from his room for her to shut up. As I looked at her, as I watched her, I got this strange feeling, a feeling that could only be described as sadistic, but also empty at the same time. It was like a dying candle in the wind, a wind that just kept on coming. Her eyes found mine, and she stumbled into the room as she took a sip from her wine glass. She called my name, and when I didn't respond, that began an onslaught of insults and threats, the same insults and threats that I have heard. For all of the time I had been under her care, it wasn't anything new. Her mocking, taunting, vicious insults were nothing new to me anymore. The wind stopped, and the light on the candle flickered back to life. With plenty of wax left, it was like a wave of clean, fresh water was thrown on me. I stood up, my eyes scanning her blubbery form. From her heel to the crown of her head, she did just the same, mocking me as the wine in her glass sloshed around, provoking me with her words. My brother screamed from his room for both of us to be quiet. Fine, I'll make her be quiet. I lunges quickly, pushing her onto the floor. Her size betrayed her. She was too big now to move quickly. She struggled to stand as I calmly walked to my bedroom door and locked it. Her wine glass had fell out of her hand, and the cup broke. The smell of Riesling coated the dull brown carpet, mixing in evenly with the foul smell of the house. One tall shard of glass laid near my feet. I picked it up and made my way over to my mother. The candle was burning bright, now that the wind had finally stopped. An easy slit across her throat prevented her from screaming too. The shard cut my own fingers as I made myself into a butcher for my pig of a mother. I had felt this wave of ease come over me as I stood over her now mutilated body. I heard my brother's door open. With every step he took to get to my room, memories flashed behind my eyelids. His abuse and torment, his cruelty. Every step brought a new memory back, and soon enough he was banging at my door. There weren't enough steps to match how many times he'd broken my arm or fractured my ribs. There weren't enough steps to match how many hours a day I'd spend in the darkness of his trunk. I'd remember the summer, in the darkness, him zooming over a speed bump, me hitting my head and blacking out. He threw me on the front lawn when we got home. Didn't even bother to take me inside, but instead left me under the bleeding hot sun, watching as my mother's body emptied out her blood, soaking into the carpet as her face is fitted perfectly into a look of pain and fear. Strangely enough, it's the prettiest she's ever looked. My brother continued to bang on the door, banging continuously, and demanded that I open the door. So I did, and I delivered the same gruesome death to him too. A slit across his throat, but instead of cutting him open, I beat him until every bone I could get to was broken, stomping on his arms and legs hard with my foot. I'd taken a page from his book and aimed for the most vital areas. The wind stayed down. I dragged the shard of glass on the wall, cutting into the dirty blue wallpaper. Then I noticed something. I didn't hear my father come up the steps, nor did he complain about the noise my mother was making. I searched house for him, just to see if he was even home. Passing through the living room that was messy with cheap wine and gross snacks, pillows thrown about and furniture moved across the room to make space for a dance area, I saw the guest bathroom light on. The door was cracked open and I could see a shadow. I got close to the bathroom and saw the dirty brown loafers my father wore. Then his legs that were stretched out in front of him that almost peeked out the door. Pushing open the door, I saw his body laying against the sink. A lighter sat by his bent knee, a burnt spoon in one hand, and a syringe still jammed into his left arm. His tie was laying crumpled up next to the lighter, and he wasn't breathing. It was bound to happen sooner or later. How convenient that it should be now. I left him there. The state of his own demise should left alone. It's the only thing he had in his final moments: weakness and addiction. I made my way out the open back door, kicking it closed with my foot, walking around the side of the house as I wiped off my fingerprints from the shard of glass. I made my way over to the neighbor's house. She didn't even have the decency to close her living room curtains. My uncle pumping himself into her as she had her legs spread open on either side of her husband's recliner. If only she knew where this pig had stuck his cock into. I threw the shard of glass into her rose bushes and continued on down the sidewalk. I'm sure you're wondering now what happened. Did the police find me? Where did I run to? Do I feel guilty? Sweetheart, it made national news. It was everywhere. A brother had killed his sister and her entire family after a night of partying with her neighbors. The weapon was found in the rose bushes of a neighbor of his sister's just across the street from the house they were murdered in. Both their faces were plastered on the 5 o'clock news. He pled his innocence, but texts between him and his sister were leaked, and their incestuous relationship was revealed to the public. The neighbor wasn't off the hook either. The police guessed he killed them out of rage and jealousy sometime after the party, and went to go make a victim of the adulterous neighbor lady. It's amazing how easily people can be fooled. It's also amazing how easily someone can obtain a fake ID, and a fake birth certificate, and a fake passport. Cutting hair is easy as well. Isn't that what people do anyways when they want to feel like a new person? Now for the last question. Do I feel guilty? No, absolutely not. In fact, during the whole ordeal, from pushing my mother to the floor to walking off into the night, the only thing I could feel was relief. It's the feeling of being raised in a cage and then finally breaking free. Sweet, sweet freedom. So no, I don't feel the slightest bit guilty. Never even for the neighbor lady who made a stupid decision and cheated with the wrong man. I do not feel guilty. Besides, if you had the chance to kill your demons, I'm sure you would do the same. You're already drowning in blood. What's the difference if you spill more? You're not my wife. I try to dismiss the accusation, forcing a calm tone. How did you sleep, honey? Shut up, shut the hell up. His voice is a snarl as he hurls his phone at the wall, inches from my head. I flinch, my body tensing. You don't even sound like her. You don't move like her. I know a damn demon when I see one. When Michael decided to return to seminary school, I supported him wholeheartedly. His newfound faith emerged only after he gave up drinking, something I was grateful for. His alcohol addiction had nearly destroyed him, and our marriage was hanging by a thread. His newfound zeal seemed like a beacon of hope, but as his evangelical fervor deepened, it created an ever-widening chasm between us and our loved ones. Friends and family drifted away, and I felt increasingly isolated, trapped under his relentless scrutiny. His incessant reminders of my wifely duties, according to his twisted interpretation of Scripture, suffocated me. We had no children together, and my family lived just a few hours away. Leaving him seemed like the only logical step. So, 2 years into his evangelical theology program, I told him I wanted to separate. He took it surprisingly well. I assumed the divorce would be straightforward. Then the seizures began. They had plagued me intermittently since around the time of our marriage. Despite countless tests and consultations with specialists, no one could pinpoint their cause. Eventually, they chalked it up to stress and prescribed anticonvulsants and sedatives. But Michael had other plans. He'd stopped taking his own medication, convinced that Christ heals all ills, and declared reliance on modern medicine sinful. He locked me away in our home, forbidding me to leave. He told me he was seeking a doctor, but returned with an exorcist instead. For 6 days, I was tethered to a bed, denied food to starve the demon out. A piece of burning firewood was pressed against my face to drive away the evil within me. I was forced to drink foul concoctions made with holy water and herbs meant to repel demons. When the exorcist finally left, I gazed at him with desperate eyes, pleading for him to take me to the police. But after a brief conversation with Michael, the man departed, leaving me once more at the mercy of my increasingly deranged husband. And now, Michael's eyes are wild, frenzied, like a predator stalking its prey. He looks at me with a mix of mania and bloodlust, as if confronting the very devil himself. Michael, please, baby, believe me, I beg, desperation seeping into my voice. I've pleaded before, but the terror in his eyes tells me this time is different. Michael, I am your wife. I'm Bridget. We married in my father's backyard on March 15th, 1995. I design clothing. I love you, Michael. I am your wife, Bridget. Please let me go. My voice falters, breaking into sobs. He opens a large glass bottle, and my heart races. I brace for another noxious tincture, but he pours the strong-smelling clear liquid over me. The stench of alcohol fills the air. It is by the Spirit of God that I cast out the demons, he intones solemnly, pulling out a matchbook. My scream is muffled by the rag he shoves into my mouth. Then the kingdom of God shall come upon you. He strikes a match. Our eyes lock. In that final horrific moment, I see the truth. To anyone else, Michael appears to be a madman who accidentally murdered his wife, convinced she was a demon. But in this last piercing gaze, I ask a silent question. Is this all you're doing? The seizures, this demon? Is it all because I wanted to leave? He responds with the faintest nod. Then he drops the match.